that might be a good thing for you. I don't know, but of course we had the youth takeover, and then last week we had Black Lives Matter. I wonder how you are all doing. It's incredible, isn't it? Because I think we're about on part 15 or something of this making sense of the crisis, and it's tiring. Wondering when things will get better, seeing the government do a terrible job of handling this very serious health crisis. It really is a political crisis too, and the government are not in a good place despite their huge majority. Who could have thought that there would be U-turn after U-turn? And what that actually means is capitulation after capitulation under huge public pressure. And the successful campaigns of the trade union movement, of Marcus Rashford. Yesterday we saw them U-turn on their food voucher over the summer holiday system. So well done at every single person campaigning and trying to change their mind on that. And isn't it incredible though that we have to, and that amazing, incredible young man, Marcus, had to struggle to get the government to change their mind on something like children, the poorest children, some of the poorest children not going hungry over the summer holidays, in some exceptional circumstances and unprecedented circumstances. Couple of announcements before we get underway. So this Saturday, we'll have the activist school. It is not too late to register. The great thing about everything being online now is there is less restrictions on maximum capacity. So there's going to be a link on how to register in the live comments. We also have an amazing fundraising event, because we need money to keep up our activism, that is going to take place on Friday the 26th of June, and we've got I'll announce who the comedians and who the artists are a little bit later on. So we've been told throughout this crisis that the government are following the science. How many times have you heard that? We are following the science, they say repeatedly. But what does that actually mean? Are they actually following the science? If they were following the science, what would that have actually meant to the decisions that they could have taken? How would the handling of this crisis been different? We have three absolutely excellent contributors. I'm going to go straight to Aisling Macklin-Doherty. I should have said Dr. Aisling Macklin-Doherty, oncologist, because she is actually on shift. She's taken a few minutes out of her working day to talk to us about the science. Aisling, it is over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you for having me. Yeah, sorry, I'm probably going to have to leave a little bit earlier, I'm afraid, as we are pretty much living through the consequences, and will continue to live through the consequences, I think, for many months and probably years to come, the devastating consequences of the choices that this government have made. I think when asking oneself the question about whether or not this government have followed the evidence, there is a very, very clear answer. Our country has the highest excess mortality rate from this coronavirus infection than any other country in the world. And that gives you your answer. Read into that unnecessary deaths from the choices that this government have made. We are one of the richest countries in the world, and we have one of the highest rates of unnecessary deaths. I think that needs to sink in with everyone to understand truly what the consequences of this government's choices have been. And it also is very much reflected in my discussions with colleagues. So every day in the hospital, in corridors, I work in an oncology centre, we're treating cancer patients. It's very much an environment of discussion, of trying to do things better, trying to be curious about how we can get things right for patients. And I think what's been incredible in the last few weeks, not only how amazingly my colleagues have stepped up, but how it is almost unanimous that when one talks with one's colleagues, whether it be a nurse, whether it be a physiotherapist, a midwife, or a fellow doctor, not a single one of them has anything but disdain for how this government have responded, genuinely. And I don't say that flippantly, and I don't, there are not many situations where I have felt that in a hospital, a kind of unanimous disdain for how this government have responded. And I think that is truly reflective of the way people feel totally disrespected, feel like they are not valued. And it is, I think, as a result of the fact that many of my NHS colleagues have been living through, have been really faced with the devastating effects of a government that prioritizes economic choices over the health of the general public. We have just been working through and living with the consequences of austerity for the last decade. We are the people that or anyone in any public service, whether it be teachers, whether it be social workers, whether it would be people working in the welfare system, anyone who's been working in a public service will feel that total lack of value and lack of respect from a government that I think constantly and repeatedly shows that it prioritizes the economic output of the city, of businesses, of big corporations over public sector workers, over the public's health. And that is what has translated into the highest unnecessary death rate in the world. And we all feel it. We all feel it on the front line. I think increasingly the public feel it. And it makes you angry. You can't help but feel angry when you see the cabinet and the prime minister having the absolute audacity to stand on the steps of their houses, their mansions, applauding, key workers, praising our dedication while simultaneously making devastating choices that are affecting the lives of millions of vulnerable people. They have done nothing to protect the elderly. They have done nothing to protect care homes. They have done nothing to protect ethnic minority groups. These are all the people that were the victims of the austerity policies, and it should be no surprise that these are the biggest victims of a public health crisis. So it is rinse, cycle, repeat with this government. I think there is absolutely no question that this government will always prioritize right-wing, neoliberal economic choices over people's lives. We feel it in the hospital, we see it every day. And unless we are willing to, first of all, accept that and make that very, very clearly known, there's no chance of that changing. And what almost unanimously my colleagues and increasingly patients want to see is a government that will prioritize people's health, the value of work that is productive for the majority of people, and not just the interests of business and shareholders, which is what we keep seeing.
Thank you so much. I can feel like the pain and the anger and the frustration whilst you're
maybe
also...
I'm just tired.
Well, you probably are. It's a mentally anguishing period.
It is on behalf of patients as well. It's outrageous. It is outrageous, and people need to feel that anger, and then they're not alone in feeling that, because it's real.
Can I just ask you, because I know you might need to go, so I might not get the chance. Lots of public health people that I've been reading are talking about the kind of second crisis, which is the crisis of people not coming when they have concerns, or delaying their visits to hospitals because they're kind of worried about the virus and exposure to that. Are you starting to see people come through your door, Aislinn, now?
Of course.
Yeah.
Cancer doesn't stop growing. So the whole time that people have had to delay treatment, and people are scared, of course they're scared, and we have ourselves tried to risk stratify patients so that we don't expose the most vulnerable unnecessarily to risk. But diseases don't stop moving, so we are now seeing the effects of people being left untreated in the context of kind of a really strict back and quite now resource limited healthcare system, I really, really don't know how we're going to get on top of what is going to be an enormous backlog of treatment. You know, people are going to work very, very hard to try and achieve that. As always, the workers will take on the brunt of that stress. But it's not good enough that our government would put that onto our backs. And they need to just start, they need to invest, as they have shown us in the last few weeks, they can do at the drop of the hat. And they need to just start doing that with public services now.
Well, Dr. Ashlyn Macklin-Doherty, on behalf of all of us at People's Assembly, thank you for everything that you do, and not least in your medical work, but also to bring truth to us here at night. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I'm sorry I can't stay.
It's fine,
sure
honestly.
Later.
It's absolutely fine. And I'm sure everybody would want to share their appreciation, and in a small way you can also share her truth is to share this live feed. So I want to get at least 300-400 extra people watching this, and then even if you share it after she's just spoken, the magic of the technology means people can watch this later, and I'm sure you'd agree everyone should hear what she had to say. I'm going to move straight on now to Lee Barron. He's TUC Regional Secretary in the West Midlands. Lee, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Laura, and what a powerful introduction that was from somebody on the front line, not just on the front line, but going back to shift now. You know, we don't hear too much or often enough from those who are actually at the front end of this. So I've really welcomed that, and I really took note of what was being said, because this is a health pandemic, and it seems to me that the closer we get to returning to work, the more distance seems to be between the government and the scientists around this. And that's what's causing us concern. It has been costing lives. We've seen PPE. We was never in a position where we was ready to deal with this, and we're still struggling on the front line with PPE. We've had workers facing abuse as well when they've returned to work because of the restrictions that have been put into place. And the TUC called for risk assessment to be published as a legal requirement as people were going back to work. Because for me, and certainly for us, it's about public confidence in moving forward and making sure that there is public confidence. And we see what happened when they opened up schools. People weren't confident that that was the right thing to do. The scientists weren't there to turn around and say that it was safe to do that. And it took teaching unions to stand up and say, hold on a minute, we'll do so as quickly as we can when it's safe, in order to be able to do it. So I think to myself that the more that we get closer back to the world of work, the more risk that people are facing. We ask, as I said, for the publications of risk assessments to be a legal requirement. We also asked for union health and safety reps to have the right of access to workplaces where trade unions weren't recognised. We've got that at the moment as far as disciplinary procedures are concerned. And we asked for it again with health and safety reps based on the risk assessment. We've not been able to achieve that. We have got guidelines which haven't yet been published that turn around and state that companies must publish that risk assessment, but we've not had it. And as I say, now heading back, it just seems to me as though we're dialing down on safety because there's an economic drive where this is not scientifically run anymore. It's an economic drive now, and it's putting safety second, in my opinion. It's dialing down on the safety. They started off by saying, stay at home, defend the NHS, protect lives. Now it's go back to work, forget social distancing, and let's see how we get on. And there is the real issue around a second spike, in my opinion. I had a meeting today. We sit on a couple of economic impact groups in the region, as other regional TUCs do. And business is chomping at the bit to reduce social distancing down from 2 meters to 1 meters. And, I've been a bit of a lone voice in that environment to turn around and say that this has got to be based on scientific evidence, not just simply based on pure economics, because there's a reason that they turn around and say that it should be 2 meters, not 1 meter. There is a transmission rate of 1 minute at 2 meters, which reduces to 6 seconds at 1 meter. So, these, they're not just talking out of, oh, the World Health Organization states at least 1 meter. They're doing this based on the science that they've got right in front of them. And that's why I think that we need to make sure that we start standing up for the science, because if we don't, and if the social distancing rule, for instance, happens too quickly and it doesn't carry public confidence, then what's going to happen? If people haven't got the confidence, they're not going to go back. You know, and what we could have is a situation which harms the economy for a longer period if people haven't got the confidence that it's safe to go back into those environments, the same as what we've got at the moment as far as schools are concerned. So there's a real issue as far as that's concerned. And again, as I said at the start, I think the closer we're getting back into the world of work, the more distance is being shown as far as government is walking away from the scientific evidence and the scientific base to make sure that people, because that's what this is about, are safe when they go back to work and are safe when they go back into the various environments. And also as well, those firms that are using the pandemic to try and force through structural change as well. We've got to make sure that we stand up to that. We've seen what's happened at Rolls-Royce. You've got British Airways on a fire and rehire policy. You've seen Royal Mail trying to dump Saturday deliveries, which will cost thousands of jobs. We've seen now that Sunday trading, they want that to go to 24 hours, and Usdaw have got a huge campaign around that. And it seems to me as though what they're trying to do is to create that structural change in order to make it, when we do go back into the world of work, not a good place to where it was before. And in manufacturing as well, the tsunami of job losses potentially that are coming through, and we'll know pretty much over the next 2 to 3 weeks exactly the state of that once the furlough scheme starts to cease. And again, we've called for that to be a flexible approach in the future, where we can use that as a wage subsidy scheme, so that where businesses can't open up to 100% capacity because there's social distancing in place to keep people safe, then there's ways that we can subsidise people's wages so that they can open and people can have jobs. But we also make sure that the safety and health of people remains absolutely at the heart of this. So we're going to carry on doing that. We're going to carry on making those calls. I think what the TUC has done has been terrific in relation to the engagement that we've made and the influences that we've been able to have around furlough schemes and around supporting livelihoods whilst we've gone through this. But we're also right to call the government out on what they're doing and when they're doing it wrong, and whether that be around the scientific evidence and base for returning to work and maintaining a safe distance, or whether or not that be the fact that it's still the case where people do return to work, if they do get symptoms, they'll be asked to self-isolate, potentially on £95 a week statutory sick pay, which 1 in 10 women workers don't earn enough to qualify for. So again, we'll be calling that out because that's important as well. But for us now, I think our main approach is going to be around making sure that the science remains at the heart of this, and it's scientifically led, not economically driven. I think that's essential.
Lee, thanks so much. And we've said repeatedly each week on this show that irrespective of what issue we're talking about, there are two pressures. The pressures of those who own the businesses, who have that desire, compulsion to want to look after their profits, and the pressure from people who are very, very worried, and the movement very, very worried about their safety. I hear you on the issues around a second spike or wave, and it is almost like in real time we're having a look at this kind of train crash, that we have some participation in remedying and curtailing some of the worst excesses or abuses, but it's very, very difficult. I've seen different trade unions having a huge industrial battles for very, very simple things like hand sanitizer, wipes for operatives, making sure that physical distancing is in place. And I suppose what I'd like us to consider now, and this is why we are so pleased to have, I'm going to say it, Professor John Ashton with us tonight, is because at the very beginning of all of this, we were told that the government have been following the science and that their strategy is scientifically driven. And I think a lot of people, especially when you're in a place of fear, want to believe that. They want to believe that that is true and that they have this state looking after them and they don't know as much, so they should just believe the scientists and the government. And we're calling that into question tonight because it's been called into question elsewhere. So I'm going to hand over to you now, John. Take it away. Sorry, unmute yourself, John. Sorry.
I will unmute.
It's the term of the lockdown, isn't it?
Can you hear me now? You hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So, hello, Laura, and thank you for inviting me, and hello, everybody. 8 minutes. I could talk for 8 hours, but so I'll just try to make some bullet points, really. The question about the science, in recent years, there's been a lot of talk about evidence-based policy. And, I think what we've had here is politically determined science. And, I could make the case for that. I think what's happened is we've had a prime minister who's been winging it rather than referring to the science. There's some uncomfortable aspects about this because the case against the way the government's handled this is very clear. I mean, too much too late, it's been described as, this in a sense, because they were too late acting, in the end, they had to do too much when they wouldn't have had to do so much if we'd had the testing in place, if we'd had the capacity in place based on the Operation Cygnus that was never followed through, if we'd had the PPE, if we'd had the ventilators. And in the end, the lockdown was done universally when it wouldn't have needed to be. It could have been dealt with on an area by area basis, dealing with outbreaks if we'd had the capacity. The constant over-promising and under-delivering with all those things. And now today, we've heard about the app that's been tested on the Isle of Wight, and which I wrote about a month ago and said that's not going to work, and they've now changed their minds on that. The failure to follow the examples of other countries that have been successful, this Little Englander mentality on this sort of orgasmic wave of Brexit that meant that they took their eye off the ball. All of that, has meant that this has been a politically led response to this global emergency rather than an evidence-based one. But I'd refer people to my writings in the Byline Times and my pieces on Double Down News to see some of the other things which I'm just going to touch on now. But, you have to go back further to see the roots of this, the way public health's been neglected, except for during the Blair government, when there was a big focus on public health with Tessa Jowell as the first minister for public health, and the initiatives like Sure Start and health action zones and healthy living centres. But nevertheless, there was one thing there which was really a disaster, which was the gambling and licensing relaxation, which is now a problem for many people. There's been a lot of people who are gambling addicts who've really got into real trouble over the last 2 or 3 months because of the online gambling, and which was something which the Labour government is responsible for. And when we talk about evidence-based policy, we don't have to go further than to mention Iraq to know where evidence was not followed for that. So, one has to be careful about just assuming that this is a problem for one party. And that relationship between politicians and their professional advisors can be a difficult one. And I'm just working now on a book about the whole pandemic, which will be out in September. But in that book, I'm referring to the BSE situation, again, that was a Conservative government, but where what was going on with cows, eating animal material was denied by the ministers of the day. We had the same thing with salmonella. We had the situation with HIV and AIDS, where the chief medical officer of the time, Sir Donald Atchison, stood up to the ministers and to puritanical ministers in government to make sure that there was explicit educational material available to people about the nature of the new virus of HIV. What we've seen here has been an unassertive new chief medical officer and scientific advisor, and a dysfunctional Public Health England, which has centralized public health into London and the Southeast and to a national agency, to the detriment of local public health. But there's been a collusion there as well, because local authorities, many of which are Labour controlled, have downgraded the status of directors of public health in the town hall. Many local directors of public health are line managed by directors of adult social care. They're not allowed to engage with the press and the media without clearance from the comms, which was not the case when I was a local director of public health. We were able to develop that relationship through the media with our public to have the confidence, which is what's needed in an emergency like this. The tradition of the annual public health report being an independent report from the Director of Public Health, that's gone. And Labour-controlled local authorities have colluded with that into making that into a corporate document that's not an independent public health document. So when it came to the crunch, and really the testing should have been a local initiative, the testing and tracing, and yes, the isolation, there was no capacity at the local level to do it. And that enabled Public Health England on the 12th of March to discontinue that and to say we couldn't do it, and then to involve Deloitte's and Serco in doing those things because there was no longer any capacity in the town hall. So this is not just a matter for Conservative Party and the Conservative administration. This is a matter for Labour-controlled local authorities as well to reinstate public health to its proper position and to set free the directors of public health and to stop them being under the thumb of directors of adult social care, which they are in many local authorities. So it's about leadership, it's about the whole system, but it's about openness and transparency, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
John, thank you so much. I'm going to go straight in. We've got questions coming in from people watching the stream, but I'm going to come straight in with one of my own, if that's all right. So I think there is actually still a lot of misinformation about how you actually get this virus, about how, people talk about it being droplets that can suspend in the air, and that, distance between human and human is important. And I think it does connect to the industrial Lee, because this is about the return to work and, how many people are allowed in a pub, for example, how far are customers allowed to stand away from each other. So John, could you just give us like a real whistle stop tour? I don't know if this is unfair, but to your knowledge about how this virus is transmitted from one human to another, and what you think the perfect set of circumstances would be to keep us as safe as possible. I know we can't eliminate the risk, but as safe as possible.
Well, I think what I would say to you is, first of all, this is not an influenza virus. It's a coronavirus. It's like SARS, and it's different, and we don't understand it fully. Nevertheless, it seems to be spread by droplets predominantly. It's what in the old days, public health people used to call a crowd disease, in as much as it's spread from people being in close contact. And that's one of the reasons why it was really mind-blowing that the government didn't early on take steps to stop these mass events, the pop concerts in Bristol and the Cheltenham Festival and the football at Liverpool. You know, it's a crowd disease, close proximity. But it's also, you know, as we learned from China 3 or 4 months ago, it doesn't survive very long on garments, but it can survive for maybe 3 days on hard surfaces like a kitchen top. And you know, one of the things that was poor messaging was really about the environmental measures that people needed to do. I mean, you know, my wife will meticulously clean the kitchen surfaces every night before we go to bed, and I don't remember that message being put out anywhere. It's the same with doorknobs, lavatory handles, and so on. You know, that's another way it can be spread. But also, and this is where it comes into the question about reopening the schools and the children, is that this is a virus that can be spread by the oral fecal route, that it can be secreted, can be excreted in feces. And with children where hygiene can be problematic, where lavatory hygiene may not be good, you know, there is a real prospect of children, even if they are not badly affected by the virus, passing it on, you know, through their intimate contacts when they come home. And that's a hypothetical thing, but we just don't know. So, you know, these are aspects where we have to keep an open mind, and where the hygiene aspects are really important. I mean, I just remind everybody who's listening that about 30% of the British do not wash their hands after they've been to the lavatory. You know, we are filthy people. The Romans introduced us to bathhouses on Hadrian's Wall, and then we just abandoned them after the Romans went away. And it was not until the Victorians turned up that we reinvented, you know, washing ourselves when we've been to the lavatory. But 30% of people don't do that. So, you know, this is an issue that involves the government, it involves local governments, it involves families, it involves everybody.
And somebody's just asked, Esther, and then I'm going to ask you an industrial-based question. Lee, Esther's just asked, isn't the science saying that the consumption of meat is dangerous? Many viruses in the past and now originate from farmed and or slaughtered animals. I don't know if that's just a myth, John, or if that is rooted in.
I think this is conjecture too far with this virus. I mean, what the most likely aspect of the origin of this virus is through proximity with wild animals, and many of these viruses that have emerged over the last few decades have emerged because of the growth of the world's population, because of rapid urbanization, because of the expansion of slum areas into jungle, which is where the likelihood is that the HIV virus and the Ebola virus came from, that intimate contact with wild animals and their viruses, and eating what in Africa gets called jungle meat, which can be monkey meat, it can be other things which are affected by the virus. And then that's probably where that came from. But the whole question of intensive rearing of animals is a worry. And although having recently visited a large-scale poultry farm just before this happened, and seen the standards of biosecurity at a modern poultry farm, I would say they're higher than a lot of hospitals I've been in. And you know, biosecurity is something which all organizations that are involved with food or human and biological products need to be on top notch with.
So, Lee, all of this that we've just talked about is incredibly important. It can it makes me anxious. I'm just going to declare, just thinking about it, all these people not washing their hands, and the virus being able to exist on surfaces, and we're asking people to go back to work, or the government is asking people to go back to work. It's asking people to go back to work and actually has never really implemented a full lockdown. And you are, I imagine, in everyday contact with people fighting for their industrial rights. What is the feeling like in workplaces? Are workers feeling safe? Are they starting to worry about this 1 meter versus 2 meter rule? And when I say that, it's about the permissibility of 1 meter potentially being hinted at by the government. Just give me a quick take on the industrial feeling right now.
In unionised workplaces, it's obviously easier, and our army of health and safety representatives, there's over 100,000 health and safety representatives in this country, at the moment, that are basically ensuring, as best they can, that the risk assessments and everything else is performed. We've got some concerns around those areas where there aren't recognised trade unions, which is why we tried to get access to workplaces where they weren't. But I mean, the pictures are mixed. I mean, some of the stuff that we've seen on social media, Amazon and companies like that, where basically they paid no consideration at all to social distancing, and we've seen that being shared on social media, which led them to do a massive advertising campaign to try and convince people that they were. What we need to do is to make sure that people understand and people know that the world of work should be as safe as society in itself. The world of work, our values, our safety, our health shouldn't stop at the front door. It should be taken in there. And as far as the public is concerned, we've seen a 500% increase in people making queries in relation to how they join trade unions. So people are turning and saying that, we know that there's a place for us to go. The shame of it is that they've not kind of been there before. And what we need to do now is to turn around and say to people that a safe workplace is a unionised workplace, and people need to join a union. I'm not saying that we should use a pandemic in order to kind of raise our sort of profile. But what I am saying is that where we've got those regulations in place, things are better, but they certainly aren't 100% across the board. And as I've said earlier on, it's about confidence and people having that confidence to go back into the workplace, to go back into the environment, to go back into society, and know that they're going to be safe when they do that. And at the moment, I don't think that that's there.
And you're right. I don't think anybody would be saying that coronavirus is an opportunity. It isn't. It's a public health catastrophe. The amount of people that have died. But let's be honest, the single best thing any working person can do to keep themselves safe at work is to join a trade union. And obviously, the ideal is that your whole workplace is densely populated with trade union members, so that you have a right to be recognized as a bargaining unit, that you have power in the workplace. And so I don't think it's opportunist to say that at all. We are seeing trade unions make massive differences to the working lives of working people in this crisis and before we entered it. Look, share this live, please. It doesn't matter at what point you share it. People will be able to see. And also, I've said this quite a lot, but it might be annoying, these people that you do it to. I don't know if you're actually doing it anyway, but tag somebody in this live that you quite often argue with over points of view or their opinion on the handling of the government, so that they see an alternative point of view, and share the life out of this live. I'm coming to quite a contentious question. This is from Lynn, and I'm going to come to you first of all, John. It's the point about herd immunity. Lynn said it's as though we are being thrown into the lion's den. It's all about herd immunity still. They haven't listened to the science. It's about money for this government. So quite a few points there, but what about herd immunity? Do you think it was ever the position that we are essentially there de facto of incompetence? What are you thinking?
Well, to get that out of the way, I mean, my view on this is that because we didn't have the capacity to test and get on top of the epidemic when it started at the beginning of February, and when these academics from Imperial College realized that they'd misjudged the gradient of the epidemic curve, because we didn't have the quality of data to go into their models. There's an old computer expression, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. So the quality of the data going into the model wasn't good, and they thought the slope was gentler than it was. And then they woke up that week, the week of the 2nd of March, and realized that actually the trajectory was just like Italy. Then I think what they came up with then was this half-baked explanation that it didn't really matter, and we might as well go for herd immunity, which would have meant even more unnecessary deaths than we've had already. I mean, I think, you know, what we're being softened up for now, not least in the care homes, which has been criminal, and I want someone to explain to me why that's not manslaughter. What we're being softened up for is to be asked to believe that this is just one of those things that happens. This is what we're being softened up for. When this is all over, that's the narrative that they will be repeating over and over again. And when people are fed up with it all and want to put it behind them and get on with their lives, that's the narrative that they'll be trying to put across. I just want, though, to agree with you, Laura, and disagree with Lee with his being apprehensive about pushing for trade union membership. We are in a historic moment, like the 1840s, when we had cholera pandemics in Europe, when there was huge inequalities in health across Europe, and when in 1848 it came to be known subsequently as the year of revolution in Europe because of the unrest, the industrial revolution really peaking. That we are in the information revolution. There is an opportunity now to totally recalibrate working life, to move to a 4-day week, to share work out fairly, to share out the rewards fairly. And, you know, that's not just for members of trade unions, that's for everybody. But everybody needs to be a member of a trade union for that to be argued. And also, because of the crisis that's now confronting education at all levels, primary, secondary, and university, this is an opportunity to recalibrate our education system. And what I've been arguing, again, it's in one of my pieces in the Byline Times, is that we should now just say goodbye to the rest of this academic year until Christmas and restart the academic year in January, because it's going to be so unfair on millions of children, mostly children who come from more disadvantaged backgrounds, because they will have missed out on so much education. And we should use the 6 months between now and December to have an enrichment program that makes use of the university students as leaders to do work with kids, catch-up work. We should be doing lots of outdoor education, outdoor pursuits, using our national parks, using our field stations. If we're only able to have 15 children in a school classroom at any one time, we need to use other places. And we should rethink the curriculum as a great national debate over this next 6 months. And we need the vision from the politicians and the trade unions to say, look, this isn't just about going back to a Victorian system of education, which we've still got. Let's use this crisis to have a new vision for it all. And let's use this as a developmental 6 months, because otherwise it's going to continue to be a shambles, and it's going to grossly disadvantage the most disadvantaged children for the rest of their lives, because those who are doing public exams next year will be really handicapped in terms of their achievement potential. And we need to move that back to next December so they have the chance to complete their coursework properly.
And Lee, I've got to bring you back in, because I'm sure you probably don't disagree with any of the trade union element of it. Was your point not that, you know, it'd be callous to say that it's an opportunity, I suppose? Yeah, but over to you, Lee.
No, I mean, you've made the point. I don't think John was necessarily kind of picking me up on.
No.
You made the point, and you know, it's one of those. But I mean, one thing that I will say is that issue around the economy. You know, we're not going back to normal. It weren't working for working people. You know, it wasn't normal to cut the pay and the wage of health workers. It weren't the normal to turn around and dismiss a care home worker as being unskilled, therefore low paid. What we've got to do is seize this seismic shift in social solidarity that we've seen and make sure that we put that at the heart of our economy and moving forward. What we've got to do is stop industrial strategies being all about the gross domestic product and GVA, and put within those industrial strategies social values that turn around and say that we believe in the value of what people do, not based on some way of looking at their skills level, but actually the contribution they make to our economy and to this country.
Exactly. And the problem that we've got is, and I'll just, you know, be honest with everyone, is that everything that John has said, everything that Lee has said and Ashlyn has said, the evidence base is there to support what you've said. You know, there has been a stagnation of wages. We've had a decade of austerity. If you talk about austerity within the framework of huge public expenditure cuts to services that most working people would interact with and use. And so all of this alternative vision, the new society that all three of us would agree absolutely has to come. We've got Valerie saying, you know, we have to fight for a better future. This virus has shown us that the people that we value, the quality of life that we want, that we can't go back to that old society, to the pre-coronavirus society. But there's a block, and it's an 80-odd seat Tory majority, because lots of the ideology underpinning this government means that it prohibits some of the fundamental change that we'd like to see. So a fundamental shift in power from those who own the businesses to the workers, a fundamental shift in our thinking about how public services are run. Professor Alison Pollock talked about social care, and she said that because of the privatisation of that network, there are no central levers of control for the government to kind of get a grip. But if we look at our fractured education system now because of academisation, or if we look at the way our health service has been completely fragmented and made immensely complex, those ideological barriers exist, and it's up to People's Assembly activists in your local groups, in your national groups, to be arguing for the alternative, to shift the framework, as John said, to use this crisis to show how different the world could be. And this is a second plug for the activist school on Saturday. So we're not only going to be thinking about the theory. John, you're more than welcome to come if you want. We're not only going to be thinking about the theory, about how we argue for an alternative world of work, environmental concerns, the theory around protests and all of that kind of stuff. We're going to be going into the practice, because how annoying is it when you've got that burning anger and rage about how the government has handled things, and somebody says to you, oh, get involved, just come along, get involved. But how do you actually get involved? Well, Saturday is a really good start, because we're going to have practical workshops too. Share this feed. I'm coming to really a last question for both of you. So we are a grassroots activist organisation. We think we know what we want to campaign for, but here and now in this crisis, John, what should we be campaigning for? You know, should we be campaigning for a return to a lockdown until they've got test, trace and track? sorted out? Should we be arguing for 2-meter rule? Should we be arguing for the lockdown of non-essential work? I just want to get your take on what you think. I'm competing with your dogs, I know, on what you think should be our campaigning priorities right now from your scientific point of view.
It has to be openness and transparency about the data. The starting point has to be the data. And if you look at the first report of the alternative SAGE, they were saying what was needed was that the data needed to be checked against the standards of quality data, and it needs to be out in the public domain. I mean, you know, even now it's hard to find the proper total of deaths. Every day I go hunting around trying to find the number that I'm looking for. Openness and transparency and accountability. There has to be an official inquiry into this. And I think that's one of the things that you could spend your time profitably on fleshing out. What's the agenda for the official inquiry? You know, earlier on, because I have quite a lot of people follow me on Twitter, you know, I was encouraging them all to keep diaries, because there needs to be all the evidence needed to be captured as things happened. But people's personal experiences needed to be captured so that they could give evidence when the inquiry comes. And so much has happened in the last 4 months. I mean, I've been going through the newspapers. I've kept all the newspapers for the last 4 months. I've kept a daily log, because I'm now writing a book about it all. And, you know, but there's so much has happened, and it needs to be distilled. It needs to be brought together, and it needs to be communicated to make properly across the whole community, to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And they can't do what they did with Hillsborough. They can't do what they did with Grenfell. You know, that this has to be a proper, transparent post-mortem, but this hasn't finished yet. And it needs to be transparent from now onwards.
I feel like the movement needs to do that we have to keep a kind of record, a bear witness of day by day what has gone on, because definitely. There's almost too much to absorb. You're like, okay, today, yeah, we need to be fighting for this, but oh my goodness, there's a whole new announcement about this group of people going back to work, or, you know, the sending children back to school. You know, I know teachers, just think about this practically, who after every single use of the toilet of a pupil, they have to go in and clean the toilet. These are teachers being asked to do this right now. And you heard what John just said. There's so much unknown about the virus. It was a trade union dispute that prevented more children going back, more teachers having to go back to work. So it really is in our hands. Lee, what should we be campaigning for? What should we be fighting for?
I certainly agree with obviously everything that John said. 3 things for me, I think. First of all, I think now public opinion has shifted dramatically, and I think social care is an area where we need to turn around and say that should be fully publicly funded and absolutely within the public sector, and we should have a fully integrated social and healthcare system that looks after our people. I think secondly, I think we need to localise this. You've made the point about an 80-seat Tory majority. How do we incentivise good jobs in moving forward? There's public sector contracts that are going to be given out, because they're going to be putting a lot of money into funding public sector contracts. I think that what we should be doing is getting hold of those local Labour councils and saying to them that they should be turning around and only awarding those local contracts to employers that can turn around and say, we're going to be paying the living wage, we're going to have trade union recognition, we're going to have health and safety audits, and we're going to basically make sure that we can incentivise those good jobs. And the last point I'd make is to the People's Assembly. Always been relevant, but I don't think ever before more important, because if they go down the road again that they've been for the last 10 years and start attacking vital public services and start imposing or implementing a form, however little it might be, around austerity, that for me will be the end of public services in this country as we know them, and will be some post-American kind of economy where people are left to pick up the pieces on their own, and we can't afford to do that. So the third thing I'd say to people is get involved with your People's Assembly and make sure that we stand up against austerity if they ever try and bring that back.
I mean, I couldn't agree.
I think he retrieved himself there. He retrieved himself from not promoting the trade union.
Lee is number one advocate for the trade unions. I'm not letting this misinformation carry on. I think Lee is absolutely right. We're staring into what could possibly be a recession, a depression potentially, and if we know anything about this government, it shall not be the wealthiest in society that pay for this crisis. It shall be on the backs of working women, working men who have gone out every day and served people throughout this crisis, taught them, delivered their mail, been the ones collecting the bins. And we are not going to allow that to happen. Lee is absolutely right. We are not going to allow austerity 2.0. There will be a resistance to that. People just cannot on a Thursday night be clapping those people and then allow them to endure pay freezes and, you know, devaluations of their job roles. I want a closing rally call from you both, if you don't mind. So Lee, I'm coming to you first. I want to know if you had somebody in front of you now who isn't convinced, who's like, look, we just need to get on with this. The government have been following the science, have been doing their best. What do you say to them? How do you argue against that, Lee?
Sorry, my 4-year-old just bummed past me, so it kind of put me off.
It's absolutely fine.
What a turnaround.
They can join us if you want.
Yeah, exactly. Well, she will. Her name's Emmeline.
Oh.
So powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, I'd say join a union, obviously. Make sure that you do. I don't really know what I said earlier on that makes people think they shouldn't do that. But anyway, so first of all, join a union. But secondly, I think it's there for people to see. You know, we've seen over the last few weeks, since Cummings went up to York, I think people have seen a real change in that kind of like messaging that the government was putting out. And I think they've been made to be seen to be what it was that in effect that they're doing. And that is this kind of like, it don't apply to us, but it applies to you type of thing. And I think a lot of people, you know, felt a little bit cut off by that. They'd done the right thing. There were people who couldn't go to their family's funeral, for crying out loud, you know, because they were doing what they were advised to do. And then all of a sudden, you know, people in positions of power were able to do something different. So I'd turn around to anybody who would be prepared to listen and say to them, we're going to, you know, this is a health pandemic, you know, and we're going to make sure that as best we can, that we're going to ensure that the world of work is a safe place for people to go to, a safe place for others to go into. And we've got to make sure that we do that. And then what we've got to do after this as well is to ensure that there is some look at how we got to where we got to and how, you know, some of the decisions that were made, which were clearly wrong. And we've got to make sure that people are held to account as far as that's concerned. And what we've also got to do, I think, if there's going to be anything that we can do to kind of turn this absolute travesty into some positivity, then what we've got to do is to turn around and say to people, in 1945, you know, when the war ended, you turned to Labour values, the values of the Labour movement, to turn around and re-inject this country into that social justice that we all know that it can and it should be. And what I'd be saying to people is that's what we need to do again, because that's what I think people will be crying out for, and they're the values of the Labour movement.
Thank you so much. And John, your last rally call of the people watching tonight.
Well, I think Lee's you know, brought together, you know, some of the very important things here. The agenda there, you know, about changing working conditions, living conditions, the legacy of national social care service integrated and so on. We know what the agenda is. We've talked about it tonight, but I think it's about leadership, and it's about recognizing that this isn't about leaders, it's about leadership. And that each of us has a leadership role, and that the leadership this week has been shown so beautifully by Daniel Rashford, Marcus.
Yeah.
Daniel
the
Rashford,
ministers don't
as he
seem
will
to be
now
able to
be,
get his name right.
as he'll now be forever known. One man, Marcus Rashford, has shown what can be done. Okay, he's a celebrity, he's a footballer, but he didn't have to do that. And most of them don't do that. But I think that the anthem for what comes next and for the People's Assembly, for those of you who aren't old enough to remember it, is Alice's Restaurant by Arlo Guthrie that brought an end to the Vietnam War. And if you go and download it and listen to it tonight, Alice's Restaurant by Arlo Guthrie brought an end to the Vietnam War. The Yippies surrounded the Pentagon and held hands. They said, if we surround the Pentagon and hold hands, we'll be able to levitate the Pentagon and end the war. And a week later, Lyndon Johnson called an end to the Vietnam War. And it was the mobilizing song was Alice's Restaurant. If one person does it, if two people do it, if three people do it, you create a movement. You're creating a movement with the People's Assembly. And good luck.
Thank you so much to John Ashton, Lee Barron, and of course to Ashlyn, who had to go back on shift. That is all for us tonight, other than to say, on Saturday, 1 till 4, we have the People's Assembly Activist School. Register. It doesn't cost you anything. And there are some excellent speakers. There are some excellent workshop leaders. You will, I was going to say I promise, but it's quite a bold claim. You'll go away feeling energized. I am sure of that. You'll meet some excellent people who also want to change the world, one community at a time. And just don't forget that date. So the 26th of June, Friday, the 26th of June, the People's Assembly, I'm not ashamed to say it, we need money. We need money to do everything that we do behind the scenes. All of the organizing, all of the activism actually costs money, and we're having a fundraiser on the 26th of June with some absolutely brilliant comedians: Mark Steele, Dane Baptiste, Barbara Nice, Jerry Potter, Attila the Stockbroker, just to name a few, all on that night, all in support of the People's Assembly, all in support of making the change that we need. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Still not too late to share. Good night, everybody.